Just a day after I asked where the Gabriel Vilardi, Dylan Samberg, and Kyle Connor extensions are, of course the Jets would re-sign Gabriel Vilardi to a 6-year deal.
Your Locked On Jets, your daily podcast on the Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey friends, and welcome to tonight's episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Harrison Lee, an avid Winnipeg Jets fan and an online blogger. You can follow me on Twitter at AgeLivingLoco and at LO_Winnipeg Jets. Thanks for making Locked On Jets your first listen of the day every day. If you enjoy what you're hearing, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe on all of your favorite podcasting platforms and YouTube. Doing so, of course, is always free of charge and ensures you never miss another episode. Most of all, though, we just love and appreciate your support. Tonight's episode, obviously, we have big news to talk about. Gabriel Vilardi has signed a 6-year mega deal with the Jets. The cap hit is, of course, $7.5 million per season, and there's even a signing bonus embedded in it, which, hey, the Jets usually don't like to hand those out, but here we have a big one, $3.5 million, which is pretty impressive. Getting Gabe back for, multiple seasons at a very reasonable cap hit, I think is a very good piece of business. And I want to chat about how that might impact the season and all that fun stuff, as well as, some conversations around maybe trying to get Mason McTavish here and what remains with the Dylan Samberg contract, because that one is obviously outstanding. But now that Vilardi is signed, probably more imminent than we hope. So we'll chat about all of that in just a moment. But before we do, did want to let you know that today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. So, Gabe Vilardi signing for 7.5 by 6. That is a little bit longer and a little more expensive than I did kind of expect. Not expensive in the bad sense. I thought the Jets might try to do a little bit of a short-term deal, right? Maybe a 4-year contract, somewhere in the $6.5 million range. 7.5 by 6 is perfectly fine. It's actually under most projections for the 6 to 7 year contract range. So for both parties, I think it makes a lot of sense, right? The Jets are taking a bit of a bet on Vilardi staying healthy and continuing to be a very big top-line performer. With Gabe, he also has to, in many ways, look out for his own health and certainly the contract situation. Having that guaranteed 6 years of big salary, $45 million, when your back has kind of been an issue the last few years, and you don't really have a lot of certainty with regards to how long your career might be, just because of injuries and stuff like that. This is a very sensible choice from both parties. I'm just a little bit surprised that we actually went the full 6-year term. I didn't really expect that. I thought the Jets might try to keep it a little bit shorter, but it seems like both sides sort of just came to an agreement that, they wanted to lock it up, take away any sort of thought of, having to negotiate this in the future. And this ensures that Vilardi is going to be a Jet for, basically all of his prime up until, age 31 just about. That's pretty good. And it's, a deal without any sort of trade protection. So if things maybe don't work out, it's not like the Jets can't move this contract. And I can guarantee you plenty of teams would be willing to take a punt on Vilardi, even if things maybe have hit a little bit of a snag in Winnipeg. But I don't really imagine that to be a problem. Even if Vilardi is just a power play guy for the Jets, he would still be doing a fantastic job. But we know that Gabe is a lot more than that, right? I think for Vilardi, the biggest thing is kind of finding a way to make the most of him at 5v5. There's a lot of interesting things that he does super well, but we know that he's on the slower side. And we also know that maybe, the defensive work on the first line is a little bit harder to make happen when, Scheifele and Connor are a little bit less invested in that side of the game. So in my mind, I feel like, Vilardi could provide even more value in a different line combination. But I also know the Jets are probably going to run CSV again. We understand how the Jets tend to think. And so I'm not really going to waste any breath on that. I will say that this is just great. I think that this is a big positive development for the Jets to keep retaining talent, especially good talent, right? you're not just signing the Vlad Nemesnikovs and the Alex Iafalos of the world who do a great job in their respective roles, but it's not like signing a big name player. You're keeping your depth guys, but it's sometimes a little bit harder to keep some of your stars. And here, Vilardi has obviously come into a situation where in LA he felt like maybe there wasn't as much opportunity, and his early start to his career was really derailed by a lot of issues with his health. And so he comes to Winnipeg with a fresh slate, a new chance to really make a name for himself, has a pretty good first couple of seasons. Really a shame the first one was marred by injury, but this past year, he stayed healthy for most of the year. He became a huge fixture on the first power play unit and has generally been pretty productive on the top line. So, all told, this deal I think is one that Jets fans should be very happy about. I think it's going to be a good one for a while. And again, if things really don't go well, I don't really see it being that hard to move the contract. But I'm really hoping that the Jets don't have to. What would be interesting in the longer term is to see if Vilardi can ever go back down the middle. He used to be a center in junior and hasn't really done it since. His NHL career hasn't really shown particularly strong ability as a center. Most of his game is more on the forward checking on the first rush, and him being the first guy in the OZ on the wing. That's where he tends to do more of his perimeter work. But if he ever was able to go back to center, it would certainly give the Jets some very interesting options. But, the skating speed might limit a lot of that. And so you just sort of have to take the good with the bad. Jay Fresh had a very funny tweet about the extension saying that he was all of these, things that usually define a good player. Vilardi doesn't necessarily have a lot of those traits, and yet he's still one of the most proficient shooters and most efficient goal scorers on the team. So clearly he's doing something right. If nothing else, I think it's just great to see that we have, another player that was brought in and who is a prime young forward being extended for a big contract, 6 years. And the cap hit, especially when looking at the ceiling continuing to rise over the next few years, is very, very reasonable. I would have thought, in fact, that if you were going 6 years, you might have to pay a little bit more. But the Jets had a reasonable cap hit. It's going to be perfectly fine. I guess the only question going forward is how you sort of rearrange maybe this top nine to make the most of it. I think that there's a lot of individual talent, but the way that it has been arranged for many years perhaps hides some of the best aspects of the talent, right? CSV is an okay first line, but if you split them up and maybe try to rearrange this top nine, you could really give the Jets a very balanced offensive look. I sometimes think the Jets maybe get a little bit trapped in that whole top six, bottom six mindset. And I know it doesn't always seem that way when you have a middle six that tends to play pretty even splits. But with how they actually perform and what you see with them, there's definitely kind of that preference for, a clear couple of skill lines and your forechecking depth lines. And I feel like maybe the Jets should spread out some of that goal scoring. I would love to see a Vilardi with a Lowry. I think that could be a very tasty duo. So, food for thought heading into a season where this is going to be a very unpredictable year. We don't really know what to expect from the Jets. I do think that there's going to be a bit of a step back, Obviously, repeating a President's Trophy really doesn't happen. But I also think based on some of the substitutions and the acquisitions, we've just seen, maybe some changes to the roster that are going to make it a little bit more challenging for the Jets to ascend to the same heights. Will they still be a good team? Absolutely. I don't really doubt that. But, there could be some situations where maybe things, they don't go quite as smoothly next season. But in the meantime, we've got Vilardi locked up. That is one major offseason question answered. Now it's time for a couple more. And one of them that I've sort of had is whether or not the Jets could maybe find a way to lure Mason McTavish to Winnipeg. We keep seeing these trade rumors out there. He might be available. He might not. If he is available and if he would actually consider a move to Winnipeg, what would it take to lure him in? I want to chat about that and why this would be a really interesting choice and gamble for the Jets to go after coming right up. We've all been there, logging on early and waiting forever for concert tickets to go on sale, only to lose your spot for a show you've been dying to see. Live music should be about making memories, not dealing with the stress of ticket shopping. That's where Gametime comes in. Gametime makes getting concert tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices actually drop as it gets closer to showtime, and you can save up to 60% off with their killer last-minute deals. I've used Gametime shopping for Ravens playoff tickets, and I actually got to see panoramic seat views that showed me where I was sitting. I saw upfront pricing, so I didn't have any surprise charges when I was checking out. It was great, fast delivery, literally could not be easier. So if you want to be like me, take the guesswork out of buying concert and show tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us on tonight's show as we are chatting a little bit about sort of the ramifications of everything that's happening right now. The Jets making some really big deals here. We finally get Gabriel Vilardi back under contract on a long-term deal. Samberg is probably coming up next, is my guess, sometime in the next week or so. Good times if you're a Jets fan now that we have one of our critical pieces locked up. But obviously the Jets still need to replace Nikolai Ehlers. And I don't think a straight one-for-one replacement is really the only thing that they have to do. The Jets could conceivably change the way that this top nine is constructed by going for maybe a center or a player in another position that could maybe give the Jets a very different look from the top down. And one guy that could do that, and we've talked about it before, it's Mason McTavish, right? Now, McTavish is obviously in a weird situation with the Ducks. We keep hearing a lot of rumors from Frank Saravalli and a few others like Jeff Merrick that McTavish might be unhappy with the Ducks. It's hard to know how much of this is really coming from his camp, how much is actually just the Ducks maybe accepting offers and shopping him. We really don't know. We don't even know if he's really that hard up to move. But there seems to be enough to where, those rumors are coming from somewhere, right? Somebody thinks that there's some real smoke and maybe even a bit of fire. And if that's the case, the Jets should probably be calling the Ducks about what it would take to move McTavish. Now, Mason is an RFA. He's still under 23 years old. He's a young center with a lot of offensive potential. His early results in the NHL have been interesting, right? Clearly a very gifted playmaker and scorer, maybe less so on the defensive side. But if you want to take a gamble, right, and if you really feel like McTavish could be a piece that really completes your top six, this has to be the kind of deal that you go for. I talked yesterday a little bit about a Yegor Chinnikov kind of acquisition, and I think that stuff like that is great. It really feeds more into this philosophy where I feel like the Jets are sometimes a little passive when it goes, when it comes to like doing maybe one of these things where you chase after a disgruntled player. Now, obviously, it's Winnipeg, right? We understand that it's maybe not the most attractive destination for a lot of players. But if somebody wants out of a place and a change of scenery, and they have a chance to come to a team that just won a President's Trophy, maybe they're not yet at the age where they have a young family or any sort of real connections and responsibilities and family obligations that they would have to consider and take into account. Maybe there's an easier way to leverage some of that and go after some of these younger players who don't yet have their roots necessarily nailed down in a specific place. And McTavish is probably one of those guys. Now, coming from California, it could be a bit of an adjustment for him. We saw Zegras having to go from the Ducks to Philadelphia, and I can tell you, having been in both Cali and Philadelphia, it is a very big adjustment in terms of the sort of environment and living situations. But hey, you know what? These guys are making a lot of money. They are playing the sport that they love. And, sometimes you just need the change of scenery, even if it's not what you expect at first. With Mason, I wonder if he'd be willing to come to the Jets, right? McTavish is obviously looking for a place to really excel. And like Anaheim just doesn't really seem to have the clearest trajectory. Verbeek has kind of been all over the place. And so if you're Winnipeg and you feel like you have a real good pitch, do you think you could maybe lure him in with the promise of a 2-year deal or something? Maybe you make it short term. Obviously, it's not the most ideal situation, but if McTavish doesn't really feel comfortable necessarily committing himself long term to the Jets, maybe this is a way to sort of have a trial period. And if it really doesn't work out, you own McTavish's rights. He's still an RFA. You could still deal him. And I promise you that somebody out there will absolutely come calling. The number of teams that we've heard rumored to be either preparing trade offers or offer sheets tells you that McTavish is a very hotly desired commodity. People know that he's a great player and has some real potential. And, everyone seems to be gearing up to make some sort of an offer. So if the Jets were to maybe go this route, I feel like there's a real chance that maybe you do a trial period here. Now, obviously, if you are spending the assets to go after Mason, you really would prefer to have the long-term contract. But the Jets may not have that luxury. They might have to, in some ways, kind of feel this one out. Obviously, there's some real risk with this asset management style, and I don't know that I would really like it. But if you think that there's a chance you can convince him to stay, and if he, maybe sees why Vilardi's sticking around, why Iafalo's sticking around, a lot of these guys who are on the West Coast and playing for, big city California teams, signing long-term deals with the Jets, maybe he could be convinced. Maybe he's not even averse to the idea of a long-term deal up front. He just wants a good spot to call his own, a place where he can play in a supportive environment, a good locker room, a team that seems to be really on the right track. And I feel like the Jets took off a lot of those boxes. Winnipeg's got a great supportive locker room now, especially since Bones came in. They have been on the up and up. They won the President's Trophy last year. They've got a good crop of young prospects who are going to fill a lot of depth roles and could really boost this middle six and bottom six. So in my mind, I feel like the Jets are in a good spot to maybe attract a player of McTavish's caliber. And if the Jets are really aggressive, maybe he would feel a little bit differently about being so desired by Winnipeg. You come to a big team like this, that's in a very small city that's obviously very passionate about the team and loves the players. Maybe McTavish would be open to this kind of move. So, I think in a lot of ways we've dealt with many of the perceptions around Winnipeg over the years. We know that Nelson said no at the trade deadline, which apparently we dodged a bullet with. So maybe that's not the worst thing. But we've seen a lot of guys who have committed to the Jets long-term, and I feel like that's maybe a shifting tide in perception. So if McTavish is open to it, I really feel like you have to try and make this sort of swing. The Jets could certainly sit there and wait until the trade deadline, see what materializes, and sort of go with this veteran group where maybe they find themselves not really in a great playoff spot, so they sell. But if you really do feel like what you've got is the foundation of what you want to do for a cup contender, then you have to swing for McTavish. You got to bring a big young player who can really transform this franchise and turn it into a truly contender status, right? I think the Jets are most of the way there in a lot of areas, but the forward group still needs a big boost, and McTavish could potentially be that guy to really unlock this top nine. It would give you a big center. It would give you a huge young forward to build around. And it would give Scheifele some really good skilled backup outside of like having Nemesnikov, Taves, or Lowry try and do it. As great as some of these guys have been in the past, we know that it's hard to expect that, to be your consistent second line performer, especially at this level, right? The Jets have skated on thin ice for many years doing stuff around having a second line center, but we really haven't had that Stastny type in many years. So hopefully, if McTavish is open to it and the Jets are willing to pay up, that we see something happen. I think that there's more of a chance of it actually coming to pass than maybe I thought. But again, these are probably still low odds. We know how the Jets are, and Winnipeg doesn't always swing for players like this. I just hope that they're at least investigating. If they make a play for it and it doesn't work out, I would be happy with that, right? You give your best shot, and if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. But if the Jets can find a single way into this whole situation where they can bring McTavish in, man, that would be fantastic, wouldn't it? Obviously, you'd have to give up a big trade package, but if you're the Jets, you've got lots of assets to move. This is the time to really try and make something happen if you really feel like this is a team that's going to get you to a cup final. But curious to know on your thoughts on this. I know a lot of you have in the past expressed skepticism about Winnipeg's ability to attract a young player like this. I myself have reservations about how likely it is, but you know what? I am happy to keep an open mind and want to be hopeful. Would love to hear your thoughts, so post them below or at my social medias at HLivingLoco and at @LO_Winnipeg Jets. Now, with Vilardi extended, obviously, there's only really one immediate contract that has to get done, although arguably two, but the one that everyone's going to wait for is Dylan Samberg. That one has to be imminent, and I want to chat about why coming right up. Hey friends, and welcome back to this episode of Locked On Winnipeg Jets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Every day, thank you so much for rejoining us in tonight's show as we are just wrapping up with some thoughts on the inevitable Dylan Samberg contract. This one has probably been one of the easier ones that the Jets have had lined up for a while. Obviously, we've seen a lot of 7x7s and similarly expensive deals for guys like Gavrikov, Provorov, all these extensions. I don't think Samberg is going to cost as much as those guys. For one thing, he's not, a usual free agent. And honestly, I just feel like, I don't know. I get the vibe that Samberg is very happy, doesn't really want to move. I think if you give him somewhere in the $6 million range for maybe 7-8 years, it gets it done. Samberg's got a guaranteed nearly $50 million in that sort of contract. He doesn't necessarily have the counting stats to be seen as an elite top guy, but, he certainly has an incredible defensive impact. His two-way game has really improved. And, $6 million for a guy playing de facto your number two behind Morrissey, that's pretty good money for him. And it also would be a great value contract for the Jets. We've really seen Friedman and everyone else just about say that there's tons of mutual interest on the long-term deal. Everyone wants it to happen. So really it's just getting it done now. Given that the Jets have traditionally liked to do things at the end of the week, Samberg maybe gets announced, at the end of next week, maybe Friday or something. Or if they really want to surprise us, maybe they drop something this weekend. I think now that the Vilardi deal is done, maybe some of these other pieces will start to fit in. The one that continues to be a little odd, and I don't say odd in the usual sense, but just like I don't quite know how to place all of this, it's the KFC deal. KFC obviously is in need of a huge contract, and yes, it's technically not the most pressing thing, but I would argue it is for this franchise and for what he means to how Winnipeg's going to go for the rest of the next several years, right? His contract has to be sorted out. Samberg's a pretty easy one. You've got $10.5 million in cap space right now to make that happen, and you're not going to need all of it. But you are going to have to figure out what to do with KFC if he's not necessarily as receptive to the idea of a big-term extension. Now, we haven't heard anything about Kyle not wanting to stay in Winnipeg. I haven't even seen like a suggestion of a rumor that he doesn't want to be here. That would be really, really, really shocking to me. And like, I would be kind of blown away if Connor didn't want to extend long-term. But if he doesn't, getting that Samberg and Vilardi deal locked up and then sort of sorting out from there what to do with Connor at that point is sort of a very interesting turn in the summer. But again, I just don't think that that's going to be the situation that happens. I think we're going to see extensions for all three. We've already checked off one of them. I think number 2 is going to be coming up sometime in the next week or so. Number 3 might take more time, but it definitely has to happen before the start of the season. If Connor goes into the year without a contract, I would be very, very, very nervous. That is not a situation that I think the Jets want to be in. I don't think it would be good for KFC either, to be honest. I think you want to have some certainty as to what his future is. And for the Jets, we just went through this already with Ehlers. We kind of knew that Ehlers was probably going to walk at the end of his deal. I don't think you can really you can't afford to let Connor walk at the end of his. His trade value, especially if you have an extension in place with his next team, if you had to trade him, would be like an immense haul. He would bring you probably multiple big picks, probably a young roster player of some sort. You'd get a proverbial franchise-changing package in exchange. And so, figuring out whether he stays or goes really is, in my mind, priority number 1, even bigger than getting the Samberg deal locked up. Samberg is honestly such a safe extension that I'm not even sweating it. It is a little bit funny that it's probably going to be the second or third one to get announced. But the Kyle Connor one, that one is making me sweat a little bit. Again, there's no real reason to believe that he doesn't want to extend long term, but we are seeing a different era of the NHL where a lot of teams are going to be facing the have and have nots as the cap goes up. And maybe this is going to be the first casualty that the Jets have to deal with. Now, Connor could really help Winnipeg turn the franchise around and bring in a huge haul of assets. Again, I don't really see this happening. I do think that we'll see a big $12 million, 8-year kind of deal roll in here over the next few weeks. But if it doesn't, and suddenly he kind of indicates that he's looking for greener pastures, maybe on a team like Detroit where he'd kind of be going back home, that opens up a whole world of possibilities for what this upcoming season's going to look like. So, Winnipeg is in such an interesting spot. Trying to figure out and sort out what the future pathway of this team is and where it goes from here. There's part of me that feels like the Jets will, play it safe in some ways, but maybe this is a chance for the Jets to really stretch their legs and try and reshape how this team is going forward. I feel like, opportunity is knocking for Winnipeg to really change this team from the ground up philosophically, and it could lead to some really exciting times ahead. But maybe the Jets want to try and repeat what they've already done, right? President's Trophy, kind of hard to ignore, and obviously they may feel like the playoffs were more a stroke of bad luck than anything, and they're hopeful to run it back going into next season. But my thoughts on that. I feel that there's maybe a little more to that than just running it back. So hopefully, either way, the Jets sort this all out over the next couple of weeks. Samberg, I'm sure, will be coming here pretty soon. After that, maybe KFC. We'll have to wait and see. But all we can do is be patient and hold on to our butts because it could be a bumpy next few months for the Jets. But as always, appreciate you listening and hope that you guys have a wonderful weekend. Let me know how you're feeling about the whole Samberg and Kyle Connor situations. I'm sure a lot of you feel like I do, that Samberg's inevitable, but the Connor one, yeah, maybe some more questions. I know at least one of you was commenting the other night about that being a bigger question than it initially appears, and it's certainly one that's kind of at the front of my mind right now with so many other extensions now falling into place. But as always, appreciate you hanging out. We will see you next week. So thanks for listening. Have a great night. And as always, go Jets go.